Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 127. I'm Enigmaeus and today we're continuing with the Broadsword build. Today we're going to finish off the exterior, or be 99% done with the exterior, and then we're going to start a little bit of work on the interior, getting things finished off in there as well. I'm saying after this episode 2 more and we'll have a blueprint out for you guys. We're getting very close. But one of the things that we had to take care of in the exterior before we could move on anywhere else is the insufficient lateral thrust provided by the blocks that we placed in the last episode. We've got these 2 little enclosures towards the rear of the ship. If you saw the episode, you know what I'm talking about. And they've got thrusters aiming sideways. There's just not enough of them. So I like the way that they look. I like where they are. They kind of take a spot of the ship that was otherwise a little bit plain and kind of put something there that was interesting. But in terms of the functionality, it wasn't quite where I would like it to be. So by placing this here, this enclosure for more lateral thrusters, not only am I allowing for those extra thrusters, I'm also creating something that would be easy to expand upon if I decided I needed even more. Once we get the ship airborne and start testing it and making sure that it's functional and not just pretty, because after all of this work, it's very important that it be able to accomplish certain things. As you can see, I'm finally getting use out of these inside corner blocks. It's been sort of like the running joke for me for the last little while, is I just could never find a spot where these things work that I'm happy with. I place them and they seem they're almost there, but they just don't quite work, and I finally get to a place where I use them and I'm happy with the way things are working out. I look at them and I say, yes, I could live with that. The only downside is it's everything else that goes around them that I'm not happy with, and I end up having to remove them anyways. So I just spoiled it for you. I know, got a little bit ahead of myself, but just so you know where it's going. The corner blocks finally worked, but it's this 22.5 degree slope that I'm building out that doesn't really fit with my overall design for what we've got going on here. So we're going to change that up pretty quick here. Just start removing them, replace them with something else. Now you may have noticed this video is a little bit longer than usual, and that's because the last video was a little bit shorter, and it's just the way the different topics come together and trying to find a natural break where it makes sense to end one episode and begin another. And in this case, we were basically obligated to go a little bit longer because there was no natural break in what we were doing that would allow us to do a full-length 10 to 12-ish minute video. And after one video previously being a little bit short, I didn't want to do the second one. So if you're wondering why it's a little bit longer, that's why. Pretty simple, straightforward. You can see we got rid of our inside corners, our poor little inside corners, and replaced them with a 45 degree slope. Not bad. We can do better, and you'll see we're going to iterate on that shortly. But before we do that, we're going to get some of the easy stuff done. We're going to take care of this little section on the front, and then I've got an idea for the top part of the ship that will sort of finish things off aesthetically, kind of tie everything together and give us that feeling when we're looking at it like it's done. And that's kind of an important place to be when we're talking about the exterior of a ship, is being able to look at it and feel like it's not missing anything anymore. So we've got this front section that we're finishing off. Very simple, straightforward kind of shape that we're putting into place. The one thing that's not working with it for me right now is that it's kind of like it's doing its own thing, this design. It doesn't really fit with anything else that we've been doing up to this point on the exterior. It's just kind of sitting there doing its own thing, and consequently it's standing out to me as being incomplete. We'll fix that, don't worry, we'll be okay. By moving these sections forward, you can see we have sort of that offset. There's a little bit of an exposure there where the transition isn't quite perfect, and we had that sort of offset, and previously it was in a position that didn't really bother me, but now having it below the front section of that cover for the lateral thrusters, it just doesn't fit. So pushing it forward a little bit works a little bit better for me. They don't seem to be conflicting as they once were. So now you can see we've got this great big long narrow rectangle flat on the top of the ship. we don't need anything particularly complicated to finish that off, to kind of give that sense that everything is as it should be, everything is on purpose as it was designed. But it still needs a little bit something. If I end up later on adding more thrusters, we'll be removing this top section from the blocks, placing the extra layer of thrusters, and then building a new top layer. Be very, very similar to what we have now. We'll probably still end up putting up one of these little aesthetic strips along the top. You can see it just finishes everything off with all the layering and all the things that were going on elsewhere on the ship. It's that final detail that really kind of ties everything together. It ties the room together, so to speak. This is the final transition, the final iteration on this design. Very, very simple. We're getting rid of the 45-degree slope, and we're replacing it with the offset sort of 45-degree slope, and then tying it in at either end with the appropriate blocks. Now it's matching the profile of the enclosures for the lateral thrusters that we placed in the last episode. So it's got that beefy, very robust kind of look to it, but it also matches with other things that are going on in a way that just kind of, again, it looks like that deliberate design, the unified sort of thing that's going throughout the entire ship, as opposed to its own individual design that we came up with regardless of what else was going on. And then we just removed some of the final little slope blocks in that 90-degree corner to carry on that sort of beefy sort of thing that was going on, the transition around. Very, very happy with the looks of things. Once it gets painted, I'm hopeful that we can accentuate a lot of these lines and layers with the paint and the texture, but have to kind of see, because who knows what I'm going to come up with there. Now we're inside, as you may have guessed, just from the looks of things, and we're placing the lift thrusters. Now this might be a little bit sort of jumpy in terms of the views that you get for the different stages of this, and that's because I didn't want to show you both sides. You can see we've got 3 thrusters down one side of the interior, and we're going to have 3 that we're going to place now on the other side. Whatever we do on one side, we're going to be doing on the other side, but just in the interest of time, I decided it would be better to just try and show the one side so that you can see what's going on, you can see how things come together, the different design elements, but not push it towards a 20-minute total runtime kind of thing. Now, the idea that I had for these thrusters, once I decided to have the jet thrusters inside like this, was to have an enclosure around them with glass along the front so that you can look in and see, oh, that's a thruster. Pretty simple and straightforward. Primarily cosmetic. I would suspect that if the other thrusters in the game come version 6.0 are dangerous to be standing directly next to, that these would be dangerous as well. So having that little bit of an enclosure increases the safety to some extent, in theory. Again, having not played the updated version yet, I don't know for sure. But even if it doesn't, even if they aren't dangerous, standing close to them, it's still going to be kind of an interesting thing going on in the interior of the ship. By the time we get all of the glass in place and set up the way that I want it to be set up. You can see we're using 90-degree glass paints. There's really quite a variety of different shapes for glass that you can use to make sort of interesting different shapes and have everything come together in a way that looks, again, by design. You're not really making excuses for anything along the way. You're provided with all the different shapes that you need in order to do a lot of the transitions that you might want to think of. So you can see here, we've got basically the glass comes out a little bit from the enclosure, and then it cuts 90 degrees and comes across the front. And then in order to add just a little bit of visual interest, we have this 22.5-degree fat block that we put like this, and then we put a little narrow 45-degree slope right next to it. And then when we build the glass around it, it looks like it's got like just a little bit of a contoured frame around that side of this glass that we're putting into place. And I realized as I was looking at the other 2 enclosures to do, that we had to do something about this core and the way it was set up. Previously, I basically just put it in place, as you saw at the very beginning of this series, like I normally do. I built a couple of concrete cubes, the big ones for the base, and then I put the core on top, and we built legs around it, and then we started building the ship around the core, elevated up in the air. Now we have to kind of give the core its final resting place, which allows us to get rid of the 2 blocks that are connecting it to each of the pods on either side, the thruster pods. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this, get everything set up the way that I would be happy with, as is usually the case, and then be able to move on from it and not have to worry about it ever again. I don't really feel like I'm doing much to improve the survivability of the core, but at the same time, I think that the ship is beefy enough that if someone is allowed to burrow directly through the hull and eliminate my core with very, very little effort, it's because I allowed them to do it. And I should have moved. That's all. Just move. That's all you had to do to prevent your imminent demise. So I'm not really too concerned about providing an extremely robust defense around the core itself, but at the same time I like to build around the core just to kind of accentuate its importance in the overall development of the ship. So you can see we've got a little bit of glass that we can look through, and then we build around it so that the profile matches what we were doing with the glass. And then the last thing that I wanted to do was use some of these little cylinders and bring it down, similar to what I did in the Saturnus with the warp drive. They kind of look like they're suspending the core from the ceiling in some way. It's just a little something that's different from what's going on around it in a subtle way that doesn't distract you from what's going on, but when you kind of look at it, it's like, yeah, that's different. That's not so bad. So here you can see we've got, picking up where we left off before we got distracted by the core, very, very simple 90-degree corners coming around to the front section, which is flat. I find it's very, very gratifying to use the larger glass panes whenever possible, because, for example, using the largest one, the 2x2, it uses 1 armored window pane from your inventory, but it covers the spot that you would require 4 panes if you used a smaller version. So there's a little bit of economy involved in using the larger panes. It's a little bit faster to build with, and it looks good. So there's all kinds of reasons to use the larger panes. But when it comes to the details, you kind of have to use some of the smaller ones. So I was sort of looking at this and thinking, okay, what can we do? And then I just got completely distracted and said, you know what? I want to place the RCS units because they're in my inventory, and that's why. Sometimes you just get distracted by the silliest things. 45 RCS units, and then we turn around and we kind of take a look at what's going on, and I came up with this idea to round off the one corner. So on the left side, if you're looking at it, the glass, you see the 22.5 degree slope and then the little 45 degree slope building sort of like a frame along the left side of the glass. But then on this side, we're doing one of the transitional corners that allow you to go from square to round, and sort of building it out in a way that it's very unexpected. You look at it and you think, that's neat, and part of what's neat is that you wouldn't expect to see something rounded in this stage of the development. So we get rid of the top corner hardened steel and replace it with the rounded hardened steel that matches the profile of the pod, the corner that we put on the pod, and all of a sudden we've got this little design that works really well, I feel. The last thing that I wanted to put in place in these guys is a light in each pod, and I had to think about how I was going to do this because currently there's no room in the inside to add any lights. All of the space is occupied by the thruster. So if I do a little bit of changes along the top and replace one block that's currently in place with a light, and then put some wall blocks and slopes on top of that so that it actually has something to hold onto the light with, then we end up with this really, really neat, subtle detail along the roof that you'll see here going into place, and we get the light that we were looking for. So we get the super narrow slopes that align perfectly with the wall blocks that I tend to use on a regular basis. They're really, really thin blocks. We put those along the top, and then we can attach the light to the underside. And then when we actually have a generator to power the lights, this little chamber will be lit from the inside. So that's the whole thing. Next episode, we're going to continue working on the inside and probably get a look at the paint and texture for the entire ship. We'll do some testing, and then the episode after that, we'll have the blueprint for you guys. So it's come together very, very nicely. I'm very happy with the way things are going. If you want to be notified about the next and future videos, Easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media, as always, in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.